We need to bring back shame. We need to bring back bullying. I hear this wee adage rather a lot of the time from both sides of any given aisle. Funnily enough, both sides of said any given aisle are largely aware that the other side is also saying it. As such, they both persist with what they think is a black and white argument that can only possibly be right in one direction. And then they pull a shocked Pikachu face when they somehow don't win that argument with the tactics they have elected to use. Because it's not even an argument. It's an attempt at a beatdown. You hear it a lot from the proverbial right wing when their diagnosis of the problem with the proverbial left wing is that they don't get enough healthy, nourishing portions of shame and bullying in their regular diet. But have you seen what happens when you try to shame the proverbial left by calling them names? That's right, they shame you right back, reflexively, by calling you names. See, the problem isn't that they haven't experienced it enough, it's that they're in the business of shaming and bullying anyone who meets their Gnostic degrowth cult with any semblance of resistance. And this isn't a recent development. The left has always worked that way, and to be honest, so has the right. It's just that the left is winning at this point. They can shame you for any reason they like, and then they get you arrested for shaming them. They can sit in the road holding motorists hostage, and they will have those motorists arrested when they try to free themselves. They can riot and burn your capital cities while everyone else is under house arrest. And they're in charge of practically everything at this point. And no matter how bad it gets, you'll keep going. Woke is on the way out, boys! The tide is turning. 2024 is going to be our year. If we could just shame them harder, they might not have us arrested. As I said, the problem with shame is it's met with resistance, escalating resistance. Moreover, it is fought with itself, as fire is fought with fire. It's an arms race. The typical response to shame is to shame the shamer, and the typical counter-response is to counter-shame the counter-shamer, and so on and so forth, as though there's any end in sight to this madness. Most of us have encountered this phenomenon ever since we were in school, or whenever we first had to encounter what we call peer groups. People who ostensibly are supposed to consider each other as equals. And it persists into all walks of life, especially in free-for-all environments like online social media. For instance, if you express confidence, then some absolute weapon in your general vicinity will attempt to shame you for expressing that confidence. What, you think you're awesome, do you? Check out this douchebag, he thinks he's awesome. Let's knock him down a peg or two. Whereas if you express a lack of confidence, then that self-same absolute weapon will attempt to shame you for that lack of confidence. Check out this doomer, this pitiful bag of wet mice. Boo this man. See, some people will just take any opportunity to shame anyone who says anything or does anything ever because they're addicted to it. They're addicted to shame. It's all they've ever known. They're not even trying to achieve anything. They're not in the least bit interested in what their shaming might accomplish, never mind for the benefit of anyone else. They do it because they get off on it. It's just psychological sadism. I mean this specifically when it's expressed among peers, hence my clarification. If you are the parent of a young child, it is your duty to shame them, as and when they make selfish mistakes, as young children frequently do. In that sense, shame is the prepubescent analogue of law. When your children do something wrong, you don't call the police. You just give them the stink eye and the wagging finger. Because young children actually respond to being shamed by their parents. They're supposed to. That's how it's supposed to work. That's the appropriate way to prepare an undeveloped mind for a civilized society. And I'm sorry if this shocks you, but the rest of the world is not your children. They're not even your teenagers, who, in case you've noticed, also don't respond all too agreeably to your shaming tactics. If anything, they are more likely to double down on the thing for which they're being shamed, because they've reached that stage where they want to be independent from you and your emotional manipulation. Well, other adults who live miles away and don't care about you or your family will triple and quadruple down in the event that you attempt to emotionally manipulate them. Don't be acting like you don't remember this. You've all been there and you still are there. This brings me onto the instructive example of natalists versus anti-natalists. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and call you that, both of you, even though I'd wager neither of you are willing to accept those respective identities. I know of no better example of two warring factions who mutually cannot help resorting to shaming tactics. One side is saying, "You're going to kill the planet, and you're selfish." The other side is saying, "Ha ha, you're going to die alone, and you're selfish." The former is, of course, absurdly hyperbolic. You're clearly not going to kill the planet will be just fine. And the other is blatantly self-contradictory. If you're creating a life not for its own sake, but for the sake of having someone sitting next to you when you're dying, then your proposed motives are not exactly selfless. And yet you might say that it is objectively selfish and immature to unilaterally decide not to have children. Arguably, yes, it is. It's just an unflattering way of describing it. A more flattering description would be, "I'm an individualistic free spirit." And it's just as objectively true to say that parents are authoritarian simps. Necessarily. You have to be an authority figure to your child, or else they'll grow up with no boundaries and become a walking nightmare. And you have to simp for your child. You have to pay for everything in their lives and defend them from the harsh realities of life. So, yes, to be a parent is to be an authoritarian simp. You just don't like hearing it because it's an unflattering way of describing what you would rather call responsible and compassionate. If you insist on using euphemisms for your side and dysphemisms for the other side, then all you're doing is playing silly beggars with words, and frankly, you're not even qualified to discuss the greater environmental issue of population management. And calling it that so as not to call it population control, which in either case can be increasing or decreasing. See, I can see the merits in attempting to curb overpopulation. I used to be a lot more outspoken about it. Many years ago, I would do jokes and routines sort of hitting back at the radical natalists because there wasn't much pushback against their evolutionarily ingrained agenda. From all sides, it was just, have kids! You gotta have kids! Nothing bad can possibly happen if you have kids. Please, bro, trust me, bro. Just spread your seed as much as possible and you'll be winning at life, bro. Nothing else matters. Trust me, bro, please. I'm doing the meme. You know the meme. I've since become less enthusiastic on the subject because nowadays there is indeed some pushback on that front. A lot of it, actually. In sincerely written mainstream media articles gloating smugly about, we're dinks. Childless people are richer and happier and more environmentally friendly. Please, bro, just trust me, bro, just don't have kids, and so on. So for the most part, I'm noping out of that discussion now that it's being conducted by two comparably obnoxious factions. But I'll still stand by what I've been saying for many years. If you want to curb overpopulation or potential overpopulation in the event that you feel it is indeed a problem in your part of the world, then the only ethically airtight way to do it is to refrain from shaming people for not having children. Then at least we're not coercing people into having excess children just because they were emotionally manipulated into it. Families created for the wrong reasons don't tend to be the world's most stable or productive families. So maybe we should just let people be when it comes to the most important life decisions they can make. And don't mindlessly shame them into spawning as much as possible at all costs. But evidently that's not good enough for the natalists. They go, no! We need to shame people. It's how we hold society together. We need to point and sneer at the unbelievers until they capitulate. We want grandchildren. And need we remind you, we are totally not selfish. And so in response, the anti-natalists went, well, we tried. We tried the only ethically airtight way of getting through to you, and you couldn't even give us that. You couldn't even compromise on a ceasefire in the shame war. So we're going to take matters into our own hands. Not only are we going to continue fighting shame with shame, but we're going to have to step it up. It's time to fire up the extreme measures of depopulation. I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm probably still not allowed to talk about it in terms of what it obviously is. By no means am I excusing this. I've been very vocal indeed about how opposed I am to these atrocities. Those who wish to decrease the population have proved themselves orders of magnitude more evil than those who wish to increase it ever could be. But you guys are still partially to blame, because you kind of forced their hand. Both of you insisted on escalating the shame war until the point where it got escalated into man-made horrors beyond your comprehension. Indeed, man-unmaking horrors beyond your comprehension. All of this because neither of you can even countenance the notion of doing something for its own sake. Of having children, or not having children, for its own sake. Simply because it's the right thing to do in your own individual case. You keep resorting to shaming and bullying, and wherever it goes from there. Yeah, and I bet you're both yelling at me right now, aren't you? I bet you're calling me an anti-shamist, which must just be another form of shaming. No, I'm using your logic against each other from a neutral perspective. And that has utterly bamboozled you because you can't imagine anything outside the paradigm of the shame war. And yes, I would go ahead and say that I do see this from a neutral perspective. I'm sorry if that sounds overconfident of me. Please feel free to shame me for that if you absolutely must. But yes, I am of the apparently unpopular opinion that if you are ready, willing, and able to raise healthy children, then you should. And if you are not, you should not. That's actually a principle that covers everything. A principle I never hear from natalists or anti-natalists. People who say, here's why you shouldn't have children, they don't actually mean no one should have children, do they? Except the small minority of those who actually want the human race to go extinct, and yes, they are out there. And people who say, you should have children, they don't actually mean everyone should have children. You don't even mean everyone who can have children should have children, do you? Or do you? Do you think 12-year-olds should have children? The ones who can? Do you think kiddie fiddlers should have children? See, some people are not suitable to raise children, and some people should be kept away from children at all times. But you never include that proviso in your argument. You just go, you're selfish for not having children. And gullible teenage girls living on state handouts hear that message loud and clear. Meanwhile, gullible, affluent, healthy adult couples hear the anti-natalist message and decide never to have children because they think it would destroy the planet. So even if your argument actually convinces people, it can only possibly convince them for the wrong reasons. shame is among the worst possible reasons to do anything. Pride is not exactly the greatest reason either, by the way. We call it a deadly sin for a reason. In my opinion, we really ought to be referring to shame as a deadly sin as well. If it's the extreme opposite of any deadly sin, is also potentially deadly. The best reason for doing anything, arguably the only reason, is because it would make the world a better place, and not a worse place. How could having children possibly make the world a worse place? Because you might raise a crack-smoking, whore-banging, money-laundering degenerate who serves only to help destroy the fabric of a once thriving civilization. That's why. That's just a hypothetical, by the way. I wouldn't wish to shame anyone in particular. Yes, it could be said that I myself am in the business of shaming people. I kind of make it my bread and butter to respond rather acerbically to people who I think have said exceptionally stupid things on the internet. But I try and stick to just that, to broad political ideas expressed in public, ideas that may have been learned from impersonal, contagious ideologies. I try my best not to criticize individuals for what they look like, or whatever life choices they may make that do no harm to anyone else. You can be a slut, you can be a drag queen, you can be overweight, whatever. If you keep your opinions to yourself, I have no quarrel with you. It's when people en masse are recruiting others into their vices by saying stupid things that I will perhaps make a funny song about such a contagion. My last song was about troonies, and my next song is going to be about thoughts. But I'm certainly not targeting anyone in particular. It's about the flawed logic of the contagion. Trying to do comedy without shaming anyone is quite the tightrope. In order to make fun, you must make fun of someone or something. But that's just it. You try and focus on something. It's a much more fruitful pursuit, in my opinion. Politicians and world leaders are, of course, fair game for the most part, because they necessarily represent something. Well, they represent us. At least they're supposed to. Mocking how bad they are at their jobs and how much harm they actually do to others at large is not the same as mocking the way they choose to live their personal lives. That's none of my business, no matter how much it might be punching up. And yes, I'm aware that mocking is synonymous with shaming. I'm not trying to get away with it like that. And yeah, I'm sure I have slipped up every now and again in this tightrope of a principle, but consider this me resolving to do better in the future. Feel free to follow my lead if you feel like it. It seems to me clearer than ever now that shaming people for choices that harm no one else is highly unlikely to encourage them to change their ways, even with regard to whatever harm they might be doing to themselves. It doesn't work. And you could throw in a couple of examples of some guy who got bullied for being fat and then he lost weight, but there are just as many examples, if not more, of people who got bullied for being fat and then became irreversibly depressed and ate themselves to death. In either case, these are useless examples if all that's illustrated is a correlation of the ad hoc ergo propter hoc persuasion. Without the benefit of hindsight, how do you know what your shaming's going to do? It's a roll of the dice, and you don't even know what the odds are. Incidentally, I've never known anyone to be shamed away from their alcoholism. They are, by definition, already depressed by the depressants they are consuming. Shaming an alcoholic for being an alcoholic is just daring them to drink more. I suspect you already know this deep down, and you know you're not helping. Oh, hey, this guy seems down on himself. Seems like he's having a bit of a bad time. This calls for one of my snide remarks. Dang, that feels good. I wouldn't put it past you to shame someone for being ashamed. Like I said, you're addicted to it. You can't help yourself. And I'll take an addiction to digestible, combustible fuel any day of the week, rather than whatever death wheel of negative energy you're living in, whoever you are. In conclusion, you cannot bring back shaming and bullying because shaming and bullying never went away. On the entire contrary, shaming and bullying have only increased on both sides of any given aisle, so much so that an increasing number of people simply aren't ashamed anymore because they're so utterly bored of being shamed. It doesn't work. You only do it because you like doing it, because you're a sadist. And I'm not even going to shame you for that. You're probably only like that because you were shamed into it. Just like any other kind of sadism, it's passed down generation to generation. And it stops with whosoever stops it. Or at least whosoever passes on a smaller punch. Do your best. Or just do what you got to do. That's all. I'm probably not going to read the comments on this one because I strongly suspect that they will be rife with absolute weapons who very predictably heard what I just said and thought, you know what this guy's problem is? He just hasn't been shamed enough. I know, I'll shame him. Shame. This is definitely disproving his point. And, I really can't be bothered anymore. All it does is make me even more inclined to drink myself to death. And it's my responsibility to avoid the things that incline me to do that. All right. Don't hit like, don't hit subscribe, don't hit the notification bell. None of it does anything. But please do consider contributing to my Subscribestar/Patreon/PayPal should you have any appreciable disposable income and you're perhaps feeling generous. It really is the only thing keeping a roof over my head, but whatever. I can try to get by without a roof. It's not that cold. Worst things happen at sea, eh? So, back soon with more music and more response videos whenever I feel like it. Why not try shaming me into doing my job faster? Don't let me stop you. Laters.